thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to finally have 1 hour of mild conversation about your story here in in immersive tech. We've met previously also in another context, but still the focus was again safety and privacy in SR. But overall, I would start by the beginning of that journey, where you, as an innovation professional, you, as someone that was, of course, very much in contact with uh, what were the specific needs and processes inside AstraZeneca, how you came across immersive technologies, because immersive technologies then weren't so available as they are right now, and what made you think that it was a good idea to start implementing immersive tech, and uh, yeah, and how did it go? How did your first projects go?
What might help for context setting is to explain that um, when I first joined AstraZeneca, I was purely working in the commercial space, the UK marketing company side of things. So a much smaller IT team, very focused on working with the marketing teams in market, in country, the sales reps, the brand leads, the brand managers, um, all the senior partners on the medical side of things. And it was early in sort of 2010 sort of period, where iPads and iPhones were becoming the next kind of device, right? And we recognized there was a real challenge there of switching from paper-based materials to digital marketing materials, and websites were becoming a real proliferation, and they were all switching to being mobile first. And how could you best provide information to patients and physicians around the marketing materials and the medicines? And so I got a really, really kind of deep, sometimes um, raw exposure to the experience of implementing technology in that space, because it's a microcosm within that marketing company and within that country. But equally, you've got the pressures of what's going on from global organizations wanting to spread what they're doing down the chain and feed technology down and through, but not really having the exposure and the experience to know what's going on in the ground. And in life sciences and pharma, every marketing company and country around the world has its slight differences, from regulatory challenges and things like that. More latterly, we have like EMA across Europe, but before you had far more isolation. Um, and so you've got to kind of sort of get a lot closer to both the patient and the physician to understand what's kind of going on. And that's really, really, really important, because if you're ever going to do something for a patient and physician, you've got to have a really good understanding of what their drivers are, what their motivators are, what their blockers and what their challenges are. And in that piece within commercial, I led with a whole bunch of others. It wasn't just me. Um, some initiatives, and we took clunky laptops away from them and gave them iPads, and we created mobile iOS apps that could capture data of what they were showing a physician, etc. So they were starting to capture that information, etc. And we recognized that you needed things like, well, a document management solution. So we implemented Box, and then you needed DocuSign so they could sign documents for meetings, and it wasn't just about one thing. And that's kind of something that's really, really critical. And I'll come back to when I start talking about XR, is it's not just one thing. And you've got to think about these implementations far broader, because it's multiple pieces of technology sometimes. It's about the experience, because it's multimodal. It's not just singular and like focused on one piece. It's what does the whole experience kind of look like, and what does it connect? Um, and yeah, I was doing that and leading those pieces in the UK marketing side of things. And the shepherd's crook, as we call it, came out, and I got dragged into global to start disrupting there, and bringing some of that mindset and that thinking into what was going on there. And initially that was in the collaboration tools space, but very much again that broader, wider sense of what does the ecosystem look like, not just what's the singular solution. Because if you're solving a single point in time problem, you're not necessarily solving problems down the line, you're creating problems down the line, and you're not thinking about a more holistic solution to what you're actually offering. And sometimes by having a conversation about a more holistic solution and a more holistic problem, you allow the person that's describing the problem to you to pull themselves out of the weeds of the minutiae of what they're describing and them to think about it in a bigger context as well. And when they start to think about it in a bigger context, you get far more information. Um, so that's kind of like the sort of the backstory piece to how I kind of sort of got into innovation. And obviously, as I moved into global, the team's remit was sort of sat under the chief technology officer, if you like. And so it was very much then looking forward to what's next, what's coming, what are the emerging technologies, etc. And that's really where the sort of the XR side of things started to come to the fore. And interesting, we had a few teams within operations and manufacturing at the time. A really great guy called Paul Foster I was working with that was starting to experiment with some augmented reality technologies. And they weren't great. They were very, very, much at inception. There was no way you could really truly scale it, let alone implement it. And there was a real immaturity problem. Does that make sense with the actual technologies themselves?
Yeah.
Um, and so we kept a real eye on what was going on. We stayed very, very close to it. We got hold of Magic Leap when that first came out, literally the first iteration. I remember being sat in a meeting room in Cambridge where the guy he didn't even bring the hardware. He was trying to explain what the hardware was going to be, and we were trying to buy an alpha version of him of it and sort of put some money their way. And I had actually built the product, and I still remember him, whiteboarding sort of trying to explain what the lenses were going to be like to work. And as soon as he sort of draw it, we all try to get our phones out, and he's like trying to rub it off really quickly. It's like I've explained it now, I can't, you can't have any more access to it. So yeah, we were very, very early in those phases of exploring. um and we had HTC Vives, and we took the technology to expositions. So every year, our senior leaders, the top 200 in the organization, the C-suite, etc., would come together, and we'd always do a showcase of things that were emerging. Pascal, the CEO, who's still there, is a fantastic guy, very, very interested in what's next and technologies and things that are coming. Um, and he would always come round on one of the days and visit the showcase late on or very, very first thing in the morning. So you always like had to get there super, super early, and you always had to sort of hang on a little bit late. But he would always come and visit. And he turned up. We had a HTC Vive set up there. It was the classic tripods and gaffer tape on the floor to mark out the area, and the beast of a laptop trying to kind of get it to connect to the sensors to the headset to get everything to work, and the controllers. And it was panic stations trying to get things to work as he stood there sort of waiting to have a go. And yeah, he went on and he played around with paint. Right, because the content the content wasn't really there either, right? Nobody People could perceive the potential,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
You could
it's
envisage the potential.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, one of the things that first off, regarding paint, so for you that haven't tried paint was like an app that in VR that allowed you to just draw in 3D, and in that sense have like an experience of literally painting in the air. And it's still out there where there are several several
Your
lenses
controllers sort of became spray cans basically, and you could change colors and those sorts of things, right? That you've sort of played
to
around with. But
actually there are also some artists still that play a bit with that and actually like create just with that one tool. But getting back just exactly what you were saying, because this is like core to the metaverse webinar series that we're doing here at HealthTech Portugal. So given the level of sophistication that you saw at that time, as you said, like all the setup was really really heavy. You had so much stuff to take care of in order for everything to roll out, and augmented reality apps were clunky. what kind of use cases did you see that held enough promise for you to pursue? And how would you did you envision in the midst all such a clunky set of technologies that maybe, yeah, there's a value there.
There's a window of opportunity, yeah. Well, there was the obvious stuff that you were seeing with HoloLens, right? By this point, HoloLens had come along, and every man and his dog was trying desperately with Dynamics to make something that could kind of work. And most things at that point were very much focused on um, manufacturing and operations and production type sort of use cases in life sciences. There wasn't anything really um, that we felt was going to make a tangible difference to a patient, right? You just can't put one of these devices on their heads and get it to work. It was a million miles away from there. It was hard enough us getting it out of the box and getting it to work right first time every time. How can you scale that and get it anywhere near a representative, a healthcare representative who was going out to see a doctor or a physician to get them to explain it to them and put it on their head, and then somehow who's going to teach it to the patient? Like, it was miles away, right? It just wasn't going to happen. And if you compare it back to what I was saying at the start around that piece of, what we gave our sales reps iPads. Well, like, you could give an iPad to a 3-year-old and they just instantly knew how to swipe and flick and do things, and there were buttons and they could press it. It was just intuitive. You couldn't do that with any of the AR tech or the VR tech for that matter. It scared people. And there was the classic stories of the motion sickness and all of those sorts of things that was sort of come back to. So the use cases that we were looking at were very much in that science and manufacturing and pipetting and all and those sorts of classical repetitive tasks sort of type scenarios. But we were trying to brainstorm and think, well, what else is there? What's going to change the game here? And one of the things I remember sat there with my team saying, what if we take this right out and extrapolate it right out again and say, right, who do we need to influence to make something like this happen? And it was kind of like, well, yes, CIO, etc. But the people at the top of the chain here, actually, if there's a world whereby they could pick up a headset and put it on their heads, and suddenly, you know what, right now in this world, lots of the time we interact through one screen. And you can only get one source of information at any one time. And sometimes we'll plug an extra monitor in and we can see two pieces of information, for example, right? But generally speaking, you've got one kind of input and that's kind of it. But when you're operating at that level, your C-suite, for example, and you may be having a board meeting, you're trying to make a decision about something, someone's always like going, well, let me just jump to the next slide that's in the next section. I'll get to that in a minute. Or, oh, you want to see the finance data now? Oh God, somebody got the Excel file, or and it's kind of you're jumping between systems and going here, there, and everywhere. And it was kind of like, well, what, that would be cool if you could do something with the CEO. You know what, actually, if you're the CFO, you know what, you want to see Bloomberg and Reuters and share prices and the kind of what's kind of going on here, there. And actually, you've got multiple markets feeding up to you. Actually, you'd want to see multiple bits of information. And so we hit upon this idea of, well, what could we I'll say easily, build something that actually was an interface that gave us multiple bits of information. And so we were talking about it and we hit upon this idea, and one of the guys started playing around with the Magic Leap SDK and the software development kit, and saying, well, you know what, I think I could get something that had 6 screens. Right? Put the Magic Leap on, and that envelope of AR that you can see. I reckon I can get 6 screens on there. And so we said, okay, right. If we mock something up for the CFO and we mock something up for the CEO, other person who'd be really, really cool would be maybe the VP of HR, rates for who's leaving, who's not leaving, etc. So we mocked up this piece, and it was just a stupidly simple interface. Press a button, it opened. You had 3 options for whichever one of those you wanted. Clicked on it, and it opened up these 6 screens. And we took it to one of these SLM meetings, and we stuck it on Pascal's head, and we stuck it on Mark Denoyer's head, and we stuck it on Fiona Cicconi's head, the 3 relative heads. And they were like, is this live data? Is this real? Like, and that reaction said, we've got something here. right? That piece of they want to see more information at any one time. We've got something here, and potentially we could have a couple of them looking at the information. Um, and we were like, no, no, this is just testing. We wanted to see what kind of happens, and it was a really, really kind of lucky inflection moment because the precursor 2 years or so, I've been working with Facebook, Meta, and had deployed Workplace, their social enterprise tool, into AstraZeneca. So all sort of, 60, 70 odd thousand people had it. And so I had a really, really good relationship with the guys there. And I happened to be having a conversation with one of the VPs. And I said, oh yeah, we've just been to SLM, building on the rollout of Workplace, etc. And really great feedback and stuff. And oh yeah, we were messing around with some AR stuff, and and he was like, you did what? It was like, oh yeah, we built this, and he was like, okay. He said, so that's really, really interesting. He said, I want to have a conversation in a couple of days with you if that's cool. So, yeah, sure, sure. And he rung me a couple of days later and said, can you come to London next week? And I was like, yeah, sure, no worries. He said, can you bring the AR thing? And I was like, yeah, I'll bring, the guy that built it and he can, explain a bit more about it and stuff. So we went down to this little office in London, and ordinarily you sign like one NDA to get in their offices, and we ended up signing about five, I think, to get in there. And it was all a bit cloak and dagger. And we went into a meeting room at the back of the building, which we never really sort of went out the back there, and through lots of doors with people looking at us strangely and stuff. And yeah, we went into this meeting room, and Josh got out the magic leap, and we showed these two guys. We were introduced to these two guys from America, and not much else in terms of context, but um, you know, meet these two guys. They're from America. They're interested in what you've done, so we showed them. And they literally, after that, got out, the original Quest ones in the black boxes, pulled out, put it on the desk, and said, "We want to show you something." He said, "There's a reason you signed all that paperwork, and it's this." And they literally pulled out first gen Quest, 6 degrees of freedom, and so up until this point, every headset had cables and wires and sensors that had to be on walls and laptops and all of that kind of stuff. And they just gave us that first gen headset, and we were like, "Oh my God!" And you put it on, and it was grayscale, but fine. You put it on, and yes, the graphics were a little bit clunky, and you had to do the nose thing to get your IPD to work. But instantaneously, we were like, now you can hit scale. It was just like, and this was 2017, I think. But it was just an instantaneous, you can hit scale with this. And we just knew from that point onwards that suddenly the use cases were going to change. You could do that iPad, iPhone moment. You could start to see how you could put it in the hands of a physician, put it in the hands of a patient, and then all of the use cases that started to fall out from that. So everything from, what up until now, what people watch videos and people get paperwork to tell them what their disease area is and what's wrong with them and what their indications are, and that valve in their heart's not functioning properly, etc. and stuff, and they see a really black video with like little white bits going like this, and they're like, that's my valve. Like, it's like it's impossible to really understand, right, what's truly wrong with them, but we show them videos of it anyway, right? And all of these things. And and so we knew, right, we knew straight away. We knew that up until this point, everything that pharmaceutical companies do to tell doctors what the medicine does to the patient, to explain the science, has all been videos and clinical papers and all of this kind of jargon, etc. And again, we're humans. We sit around campfires, we tell stories, we imagine things, and we paint visual pictures in our minds. And so we knew, again, even for that stuff, what, this is why you want to prescribe this, because it does this and it doesn't do these things, etc. The opportunities were absolutely huge for us, Luis. That's kind of that was the tipping point moment.
And then from then on, you started, then you saw the scale potential, and how did it go, and how did you achieve internal buy-in, and how did you start rolling out the projects? Because that's, yeah, I can foresee a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is applicable not just to healthcare, but I think it's to every industry and every company that are having that moment whereby they're saying, "Oh, yeah, we can actually kind of see the potential," right? I know AI has taken all of the kind of the the brouhaha at the moment, etc. But the companies that are thinking beyond AI to the user interfaces of AI, right, should be thinking XR, right? And so we were instantly thinking, you know what, do we even have people that can develop using Unity and Unreal already working for the organization? So we instantaneously set up a community on Workplace and said, hey, if you've got these skills, come and join the working group. So we could get a handle on who might already be doing stuff in a 70,000 organization, so we could get a handle on what they might be doing, so we could pull that story into part of our business case. So if you're working with anyone in any size of an organization, try and get a little bit of a community in that organization going, because you can guarantee there's someone that's been dabbling somewhere, right, in their own time, and done a little bit of gaming or something or other, and they've got some Unity skills or Unreal skills. And so you need people with skills. So it was instantaneously, what sort of roles do we need? What would a capability look like? What are the skills? You know, people that could do, the actual development, people that can do asset creation, anyone that had networking skills. And by networking, it's the VR side of networking and sound. And so you need to have lots of different roles, production people, right? And making VR content's not like building a website. You don't just bring in the same UX team and say, hey, we need a website to do this. It's like actually making a film or a TV production. It's 3D dimensional, etc. There's more to it than just, um, you know what, well, we don't like the fact that that box hasn't got rounded edges. We need someone to change the round. It's far more than that, right? The flow of the website. So you need production people. So we were thinking about what are the roles, etc. And then what are the technologies that you need? And when we started to think about the technologies, you need the basic stuff, your Blender, your Mayas, your Pixies, etc., your Unities, your Unreals to get through that production pipeline. And then you go back a step and you again and you say, oh crap, okay, we've produced a load of stuff. Where do we put those assets once we've produced them? You know what? We need an asset store. And then you say to yourself, well, if we really kind of like thinking future for this and ecosystem and scale, AstraZeneca, right? We're thinking about making medicines and doing some stuff on production lines. But the bigger picture of all of this and that ecosystem of the scale and the grant is actually, this is the precursor and the inputs for digital twins. And it's buildings and it's tables and it's chairs and it's benches and it's equipment and it's all of these things that are going to go into those experiences, which are the same microcosm of an experience, which is a operations manufacturing person doing a process, is one virtual room in a virtual digital twin of the whole entire building. And so it was very much thinking, Jesus, on a global scale over 100 different countries around the world, God knows how many buildings, how do you pull in from AutoCAD and all of the other tools those 3D models and images and make them available so that you don't pay or recreate them all over again yourselves, because you've probably got the assets somewhere in your organization. And so when you guys are doing things and you're working with small healthcare entities, etc., what have they already got? Ask them. They're gonna have stuff. Don't recreate everything. One of the biggest things you can do is save time and save money for you and for them, is getting hands on assets. It's an absolute golden key piece of information. It'll also enhance your value to them, because you're having that conversation that way with them and just not saying, hey, you know what, you want that experience, we can build everything for you. It also means that you're not then having to spend some of your profits potentially buying things from Unity Asset Store, Unreal Asset Store, or another asset store that could have already existed within that organization that you got hold of. And that then got us thinking, right, beyond the creation phase, and where does the data go for this and those pieces? This is going to end up on a employee's head, and they're going to have interactions with that piece to test their level of mastery. So on a production line, how quickly can they learn how to use the production line? How many times do they fail? Where do they fail? They're always failing on that step. We need to do more training on that step, right? But you need to get that data to know that, or you need to understand that, what, hey, they've completed it and need to update their training records. There's data starting to flow. And again, we kind of said, okay, that's the internal stuff. But what about patients and healthcare professionals? What happens with the data flow there? And it kind of went back to what we'd learned and what I'd learned in the commercial side of things. And what we learned there was that um, there's this whole kind of sort of industry, if you like, where there's lots of third parties out there that will build things for the healthcare industry and for patients and physicians. And one of the decisions you guys will have to make if you're making things is to decide, are you interested in that data and do you want to make a product out of that data, or are you interested in selling them the experience of what it is that you're building for them? Because it has some connotations, right? GDPR, are you a processor or a handler, right? Do you need to have that information or not? Is your business model built upon, we've made it for you and we've built the analytics. The product costs this, the analytics cost, oh, just this. It's just this every month for perpetuity, right? But is your revenue and your business model built upon, you make a few of these experiences, but you're actually really making your revenue and your money from the renewal data, etc. stuff? Because at some point, and that model works right now, the way that healthcare works, doesn't matter every country in the world, people I've spoken to, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, US, UK, Portugal, all over the world, most people that are working in this space right now have a model which is, we can build you the content, oh, and we'll charge you a recurring fee for the analytics. And what's keeping them going is the recurring fees for analytics, because they're building pieces in isolation. Well, what's going to happen with XR is that ultimately that model is going to get flipped on its head. And whether it's pharmaceutical companies working with lots of small entities and paying lots of pieces of money for these fragmented data and analytics, they're going to stop, right? And the same right now, NHS is an absolute mess in terms of what it's doing, in terms of multiple VR pieces fragmented across regions, etc. and stuff, and lots of data and analytics not even being paid for and not being captured, or where it is, it's all in isolation and fragmentation. But that's going to change, right? This is the, if you like, when people say, why isn't XR taken off? It's got nothing to do with headsets. The headsets are fantastic, they work, right? Yes, Meta, Pico, they want to be the leaders and they're a bit of a pain in the ass in terms of allowing you to scale that side of things. Content, you can scale it to the cows come home. The piece that's critical in the ecosystem is the data. And nobody's really got a grasp on how best to do that. And if you're a developer, fantastic, great. You're going to end up with lots of fragmented pieces of data where you've providing Spotfire or Power BI or Splunk dashboards for these organizations, which will only last for so long. The reason that this data piece is in this inflection is going to happen is because of digital twins and the future. Because AI has got just about as intelligent as it's ever going to get. It's absorbed everything and every piece of data and information it possibly can. The only way it's going to get any better now is just by people getting better at tuning it and refining it and all of those sorts of things. The only thing that's going to make it any better now is more data. And that data is going to come from digital twins and sensors and virtual and augmented experiences. And those virtual and augmented experiences are the things that you guys are going to create and design. And so these companies have got to flip their models on their head and start controlling their data from the stuff that they've commissioned to go out to patients and physicians to come back the other way for clinical trials, for all of these sorts of things, so that they can laden their AI over the top to gain the insights, etc. And so that's really, really, really critical. And hopefully
It
that
is. It is.
makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. It's absolutely crazy the amount of data. Well, first off, data has been the not so hidden secrets, and someone said the new oil, and indeed it generated more than I believe at least three of the top 12 companies in the world today, they're all based on data, and seemingly it seems like no one is actually like acknowledging it daily as we all should. Yeah, it's
Well,
I think it was
you look at
yeah,
Google, Facebook, Meta, the key players in this space, they're data companies. They're absolutely
absolutely.
data companies, as they've just proved with the release of the new version of Llama, the new Gemini, right? These guys are a data companies, absolutely 100%.
That's exactly it. And when we talk about AI, and when we talk about emerging tech, sorry, about immersive tech, when we talk about IoT, when we talk about digital twins, we're always talking about data, always.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's about when we talk about converging technologies, we're always talking about converging data,
Yeah.
and that's where the main value for organizations lie. And immersive tech has an added value. I believe it was California Berkeley University that did this. It did this study on the amount of key identification points that could be extracted from people or from users,
Mm.
and they uh, were able to extract I think it was around from 10 minutes experience, around 2 million identification points for
Yeah.
one individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like amazing that the
Yeah.
number of biometric marks, the number of hints, and on top of this, and this is really important, organizations can, on top of this, infer data. So they can, like, for instance, from this hand say, okay, so this guy has chronic disease, or he uh,
Hmm.
doesn't lick his
Yeah.
nails, or
But from your gait, they can tell if you've got lung
my
disease,
age. Exactly, exactly.
right? It's phenomenal the amounts of inferred information that they can take from that piece basically. So yeah, it's quite remarkable in that regards, what they can get away with and do. Um, but the key thing is that the the informatics side, the AI, the data's been there, right? Informatics has been around for years.
Yeah,
XR kind of leapt in front a little bit from an awareness perspective, but hasn't reached its for potential. And then AI, from the informatics being around for so long, has suddenly had its inflection moment. And what's going to happen once that data piece has happened is obviously XR is going to come back to the fore again, because as the interface for that information, they're just going to supersede each other again. And so rather than with lots of other technologies that have had their big bang moment, these two have had sort of two phases, right? You've kind of had informatics has been there for ages. Then XR had its first flare up. Now we're having Gen AI, etc., AGI, and all the rest of it coming and whatnot. And there's going to be another phase of XR where all of a sudden it really hits that inflection point, and and comes to the fore again, where the two reconverge. And so it's kind of like parallel swim lanes. But organizations are really blinkered at the moment with the AI side of things and not thinking about this XR piece. And this moment right now with XR, the last 2 or 3 years, should have been for lots of organizations the blimmin' hell. We get this, we can understand it, we're strategically thinking and planning ahead for it, twins and everything else. But lots of them haven't. It's quite bizarre. Lots and lots of organizations that I talk to, just they've seen the metaverse stuff, they've they've kind of heard spatial web, they've heard Apple with spatial computing, but very few of them actually really kind of like grasp how those technologies with hyperledgers, yeah, and when I say hyperledgers, I mean what the layman will call blockchain, and I don't just mean for money and crazy monkey pictures and stuff like that. Um, like true use of hyperledgers, and all of those sorts of things, a whole change in architecture and data and how it's owned and administered. Um, those things are all going to happen. but lots of people aren't thinking strategically and looking far enough ahead. They've got very, very blinkered on AI. And so pulling things back a little bit to the question you were asking before, Lewis, around what do we do? We looked at the people, we looked at the technologies, um, and we started to pull all of the insights of what was going on inside of AstraZeneca together. And we started saying, well, my God, okay, well, these people are working with that third party, and these people are working with this third party, and this is kind of going on, etc. And so we pulled together a view, a lens, if you like, of what was already going on inside the organization, around where there was fragmentation, where data's going out here and there. You're going to be paying retained fees for all of these things. And we architected an ecosystem that's put that creation engine at the front, data in the middle, and the user experiences and the devices around the periphery. Um, and we put at the time with tons and tons of research. Kudos to a guy in my team at the time called Andy Oldroyd, who scoured everywhere that he could to find anything that could do, data in this space. And we came across a company called, Immerse.io. Don't mind name dropping them. Hopefully that's okay. And they're literally a data company that sits in VR. They make content as well, but their platform is just a data company that sits in there. They have an SDK. And so when we were looking at scale, and if you think about scale and you're an organization like AstraZeneca, there's going to be stuff that you absolutely unequivocally have to do yourselves and build in-house, right? You cannot use a third party for it, but you still need to get the data out of it, and you want to get that data into the same place that, what you want to work with the best agencies of record for the therapy area that you're working with, the physicians and the patients that are going to be involved. You want to work in with the best agencies to create the best content for them. That's not necessarily going to be your internal team, but you need to give them the tools to make sure that the data from them comes back to the same place. And that's ultimately what Immerse does. And so we designed an ecosystem that allowed us to work with whoever we needed to, but to make sure the data always came back to one place. Now, globally, the explosion in 3, 5 years is Immerse going to be that one platform to rule them all? Who knows, right? Probably, possibly not. There's going to be a Google Analytics, I'll call it, equivalent of for XR that everyone uses and pulls back to their own safe space, and that's really, really critical and vital. The other bit that facilitates the creation of that ecosystem is two things: money, right? So you got to go get yourself some money. And we did the classic thing of putting together a business case. Now, this is applicable whether you're doing this internally within your organization or you're trying to sell your services to an organization like a pharma company or a healthcare entity. Well, they do their budgets once a year. When do they get the money? Right? If they've forecast what they're going to spend in the next year on what they're going to forecast it on, and they've done their brand plans, and they've gone and presented that, and they've got their budget approved in, I don't know, July, August, and they get their money, well, then chances are you're not going to get any money from them until the following year. So you might be having lots of really, really great conversations with potential companies that might be interested in your products or healthcare entity. Understand when they can buy. It's one of the most critical things in the world. Understand when they can buy from you. When's the money actually going to materialize? Because otherwise you could be 11 months away or 1 month away from getting any money from them. So really kind of like make sure you understand their buying position if they are going to buy from you. I'd say it's absolutely critical. It's something I've learned both being in AstraZeneca and being outside of AstraZeneca.
I
Um,
mean,
the other piece that's really, really critical. Sorry, Louise.
no, absolutely. I was
Oh,
just wondering one thing regarding because adoption is always the issue, right? And ramping up of an immersive tech project, something that implies a lot of onboarding, lot of upskilling. How many people did you onboard and used VR and AR in AstraZeneca? And what were your challenges in onboarding these people and pushing things forward?
sure. So we had multiple different use cases. Um, the onboarding piece was the classic. The first thing the I feel sick element. I might feel sick, or I felt sick when I've used this before. Now, most people that you speak to when they say that, I say to them and always ask the question is, walk me through the experience that you had last time. They said, I turned up and they gave me the headset, I put it on, and I was in this experience. And I said, hold, you went straight into the virtual reality, into the experience? And they're like, yes, okay. And then all of a sudden, things were moving around and I was kind of like moving around and it all just felt really disorientating and I felt sick. And I say instantaneously, okay. I said, we can fix that. And they're like, really? I'm like, yes. So you put the headset on, you take it out of the experience, and you go to Guardian mode. And you walk that person outside of the Guardian, and you hold the headset up and you say, just look through the lens now. And they kind of look through and I say, can you still see the room with the Guardian zone? And they say, yes. I said, when you walk into that in a second,
Just to clarify to everyone who doesn't know what the Guardian Zone is. So when you start a VR experience, you have to establish a zone, an area where your VR experience is going to happen. So when you step out of that area, you will see that area, but you will be outside of the VR experience, which means that you will be seeing reality through the glasses cameras. So sorry, just to set
no,
up
no, no,
the topic.
so you see the real world and you understand where the Guardian zone is. And then I always get them to hold the lens, the headset, not put it on, and put their hand out in front of them so they can see their real hand in the real world and start to walk into the Guardian zone. And their hand starts to, oh, it's gone red, and then it disappears, and then the headset goes into it, and then they're in the VR. And I just say, look, that's the experience. That's you're inside the experience now. And they say, oh, yeah, I understand this now. And I say, turn around, put your hand out in front of you again, and walk out of the experience. And they say, oh, my hand's going red again. Oh, yeah, oh, I can see you now to see the real world. Now, do you understand the context? Like you're going instantaneously, like, yep, back in, poof, headset. 20 minutes later, you're saying, okay, somebody else needs to go. Context setting, getting someone to understand. If you just put them straight into VR, they lose all instantaneously connections to the real world. You super simple. You get them to go in, their brain goes, I understand this now. You get them to walk out, their brain goes, oh, double down, I definitely get this now. They walk back in and they have the experience. So addressing those things is really, really key. Getting lots of people who then become advocates for that really, really key, because those people who've had that experience now become advocates for it and they get it and they understand it. And so that's really, really key. We had multiple experiences. That's to me, that's like the key thing about the user experience piece, Luis. And then obviously messing around with eyes and additional bits to make it bigger for glasses, etc. They're the couple of key pieces for the actual user experience and the users. Um, and then in terms of scale, to give you an example, we ran a collaboration space experience, had nearly 200 people in it at one time, right? Kind of running around, talking to each other, having individual breakout conversations, etc. And so that's like scale at any one time. And then like multiple other projects where devices were going out. We had one use case in the US where because of COVID, they couldn't obviously come into the offices and be trained and upskilled. We actually did a product launch via virtual reality. So every new sales rep that came on was sent a headset. They did the experience at home, went through a day in the life of the patient. So understanding what it was like to have a headset on, to be stood there holding a stage 3 heart attack diagnosis, and then going home, understanding about taking their medicines and things like that, creating an emotive experience, and joining a connection between the patient and the sales rep. And that was laden with lots of voiceover messages. So what's really, really key about VR is that obviously you can see lots of different things in there, but because you're sort of closed off from the world, what's really powerful is the messaging through the voice, because that's all you hear. And so for adoption and retention of information rates, it's huge. You get the right combination of the visual and the audible together, and retention goes through the roof. And we were seeing rates for, so sales reps have validations before they're allowed to go and speak to a proper physician in the real world to know, make sure they understand all the proper messaging around the product they're going to sell potentially. Um, and so they have a validation with a real doctor, and that gets recorded, etc. Well, we were doing control groups, people that were trained via video in real, and then having video recordings, people who were trained in VR, and the people who were trained in VR were remembering double the amount of key information and patient-centric words and all of those sorts of things versus those that were trained via traditional methods. And so the scale doesn't have to be lots of numbers to reach lots of people because those devices were just being reused over and over and over again. And similarly in operations and manufacturing on that sort of things, use cases doing exactly the same thing. There wasn't doesn't have to be tons of devices, but lots of use of the devices is really, really critical and key. It's not about scale, isn't about devices. Scale is about the number of times somebody uses the experience. And that's a key differentiator. The way that Pico and Meta and those guys are all kind of pushing the industry is, hey, how many devices can you sell for us? How many devices does your use case sell for us? It's it's not, it's about experiences. The device has got nothing to do with a patient or a physician. They don't care about the device, right? They care about the information and the experience and the understanding and getting better and their wellness journey. And that's what's absolutely critical. So scale's kind of an easy one to get lost in, but definitely think in terms of experiences. Um, we had something in the region of about 20 to 30 different experiences across operations, R&D, and commercial, and lots in the pipeline. Um, and equally, having left AstraZeneca and I actually worked for Immerse for a brief period, and worked with a whole bunch of different pharma companies there, who were doing similar sorts of things. So there's lots of use cases now in life sciences where they're starting to look at it. Lots of the commercial teams are starting to look at it now, and so they're looking for trusted partners who they can partner with and work with, and gain scale. A good example that's not in healthcare, but you can go look up is Nestle. So um, you can think of use cases in terms of clusters. And Nestle did a fantastic piece with Immerse, and that was around health and safety in their factories. And so it was 4 or 5 different pieces of content all around safety. And they rolled it out to one factory. Um, Fantastic adoption results. The feedback was brilliant. And they've deployed it across all of their factories globally now. They're pushing it out. So, and that's not about number of headsets per se. Again, it's about number of people having, you know, critical incidents and hazards, etc., in these environments and mitigating that stuff through more immersive training where they retain far more information. And so yeah, there's lots and lots of different use cases now, like really, really blooming across lots of industries. Healthcare and life sciences, as you guys know, you're on the front line speaking to patients and physicians, what's there and what will work. The key thing I would say is that it doesn't have to be virtual reality. We've talked a fair amount around virtual reality, etc. But augmented reality, especially with patients, is really, really key. Things with low barriers to adoption, whereby they can be given a QR code that they could scan. And we built a few of these as prototypes within AstraZeneca for how does an inhaler work, right? One of our products is literally a sachet that you mix within water,
Yeah.
but you have to mix it a certain way, etc. Like all pharmaceutical to get the active pharmaceutical ingredients to activate and work properly, etc. And they were simple QR scan things that people can then use with their phones. And the phone is the device that everyone has in their pocket. It's capable of augmented reality experiences nowadays. And so, very, very low barrier to adoption. You know, as I say, a physician can give that to a patient, they can take it home. One of the key
It's very
things,
straightforward.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very straightforward, right? And one of the other key things is, I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have had a life-changing diagnosis. I had one myself back in 2020, 2018, sorry. And you get given a whole bunch of materials that like I described earlier, videos and leaflets and stuff, even still now. Um, and but for a QR code that you could just scan and show because it's not just a diagnosis for you as an individual, it's a diagnosis or a prognosis for your whole family and your friends and stuff. And you find yourself repeating over and over again all of the things you've been told because everyone cares, they all want to know, but you're trying to understand it yourself from 2D materials, which are terrible, and trying to explain it. And actually, if you can just scan something and show them, and they can go, oh wow, right, all of a sudden their learning curve has gone like that ultimately, basically.
Absolutely. No, uh, it's crazy, the amount and diversity of use cases, and as you said, um, yeah, most of the times growth has a lot to do with, or is seen by some of the players in the market as just putting headsets on the hands of people. It's a catch-22 because people won't use the headsets if they don't have the necessary content, people and organizations. So it's all about also creating experiences and applications that are meaningful. Meanwhile, we have some more minutes also for Q&A if anyone out there wants to place some questions to Paul. And meanwhile, we actually already have one from an old colleague of yours here in from AstraZeneca while you were in UK. Rita was also here in the Portuguese MC, and she's curious to know that once you moved into global, how were you able to navigate working on compliance teams in immersive tech projects?
Great question. And the key thing is, and again, something I learned when I was in the UK marketing company was that it always surprised me that and it didn't matter if it was IT were doing something or the business was sort of doing something and it was more business focused, but they always kind of would work with an agency or a third party and they would solve everything, right? Yeah, we've got it. We've solved it. We've nailed the product. We've got the idea. We've got the whatever it's going to happen to be. And then they'd go and speak to regulatory affairs or the signatory, right? And then suddenly they'd get this like, but what about, but what about, but what about? And then it would just kind of like, you'd be like, "What?" And I saw it happen so many times. And so personally, when I first moved to global, what I actually did was because my responsibility was to start looking at new and emerging technology, and very much that means kicking the tires of something, right, to understand. And every time I would have a conversation with security or privacy or compliance and these teams, they would like put these spreadsheets of doom in front of me with like a million questions on them to be like, you need to answer all of this stuff before you can do anything. And it's like, this is like unreal. Like, and this is something you've got to prepare yourselves for because when you're working with some of these entities, you're doing something small in health tech, they're going to ask you to fill this kind of stuff in. And so what I did when I was with AZ was I actually ran a workshop and I brought from someone and a security guy flew in from Sweden, previously came up from London, and I brought a whole bunch of folks together. And what I'd done is printed out all of their questions onto A3 paper and stuck them in this meeting room, all around the walls in this meeting room. And literally with a yellow pen, I then started saying, right, that question is also on this spreadsheet and it's on this bit of paper and that bit of paper. And da, 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 da. In the end, I ended up with 78 unique questions across this whole thing. And I was like, do you understand? You're all just asking the same things and you're not sharing it with each other and you're all getting us through this in isolation. And so one of the other things totally unrelated to XR or any of that kind of stuff is I actually established an emerging technology checklist to say, if you answer these questions with a vendor that you're evaluating and they're all good, then you're okay to evaluate that piece of technology and play around with it, etc. and stuff like that. But that was all predicated upon engaging those teams before I'd even done anything with a piece of technology to understand what's the bars and the barriers for adoption and how far can you go at certain phases to work on those things and evaluate that piece, which means you've allayed most of their fears right at the outset. So when you have got that piece that's ready and in place, you're just having a conversation, which is, oh yeah, that makes sense. We understand that. And you're just reiterating and refactoring the stuff they've already asked you and what you already know. And then the papal blessing, as they say, is going to be that much quicker to come. But it doesn't mitigate the fact that with emerging technologies, they may not understand the technology at all, right? One of the biggest barriers to adoption in organizations, it doesn't matter how big they are or healthcare entities, is that people don't understand what on earth Unity does, right? And you've got the licenses for Unity, which is licensed to the developer. So the content is licensed to the developer, but someone's paying you to make that bit of content and they want to own everything. And they're trying to get you to sign an MSA, which says, but we own anything, we're buying it from you. But it's licenses Unity to you. So you've got to go through those conversations around understanding the ecosystem and educating these people who have spent the last 20, 30 years buying tin. And tin, I
Yeah.
mean servers that go in racks and rooms and stuff like that, and hardware and CapEx and OpEx things. And now suddenly you're talking about not just software as a service, which is Amazon Web Services and cloud things and your Splunks and Spotfires and bits, but actually interoperable, multi-licensed ecosystem of technologies that all combine Blender, Maya, Unity, right, to create an experience, etc. So there's a
One doesn't need to
yeah,
be an expert there, right? It's just have a notion, right? And sometimes even like I would say even simpler things. Sharing a very quick story. I was in front of an innovation team in a market, well, in a healthcare market, pharma. And at a given point, I realized 15 minutes into the meeting where we were discussing a VR program, a VR training program that they were going to run. 15 minutes in, I realized that they did not have tried, experienced VR yet,
yep,
but
exactly.
they were going to manage a
Hmm.
VR training program. So the issue of like trying to see stuff as merely processes and not trying actually to understand the whole benefits that are going to be leveraged through these processes.
Yeah,
I believe that is clearly an issue that needs to be tackled alongside with the fact that we're talking about something that is fundamentally changing our way of interacting with digital, right? Through the headsets, the voice commands, the gestures. So it's also much different from the mouses and trackpads and keyboards that we invented like 30 years ago that we're so used to. So it's a big change, but at the same time, it's as you say, one needs to, if we actually are up for it, one needs to like know a bit more and get curious and get interested and explore a bit more about this. Um,
100%.
yeah. Meanwhile, Paul, we're out of time. I think that we need to
It's
do
one of
a
those
second.
conversations you could, could be th 4 hours long.
Yeah, and hopefully we will have like a second part because it makes absolute sense for us to continue because we only covered like a small part of your
Yeah.
of your story, but just this small part was really insightful. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you
Absolute
so
pleasure.
much for being here, and thank you all also for attending the Metaverse series webinar here at HealthTech Portugal.